Hey everyone, welcome to Playthrough. My name is Jim Price, and this is What Does Replayability Mean in 2019? I also call myself the Board Game Bandit on my social media and podcasting channels, and I'm also one of the hosts of Crank It Up Podcast, which is currently a podcast that focuses largely on Smash Up, a very popular game, but we're in the middle of transitioning into some other gaming systems, which you'll hear more about over the course of the convention. So just a little bit about myself. There is going to be a small element of bias, and I want to make that known prior to the actual talk. So what do? I'm a senior systems engineer. What does that mean when people ask me? I tell them I don't know. But what I also tell them is that a system is when the sum is greater than the whole of its part. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. When you can get more out of individual components, that to me is a system, and it's greatly influenced how I view gaming overall. My favorite game mechanic is variable player powers. You'll see that in a lot of the games that I demo. I believe that it creates a lot of replayability and a lot of interesting strategy decisions. And finally, my preferred game length is in the 45 to 90 minute time slot. I like games where you can get involved, but it doesn't take up a large amount of time, particularly because I want to be able to play them over and over again. So this is a sample of some of my top 10 favorite games, and you're going to notice a pattern amongst them, which I'll be talking about throughout the panel. My absolute favorite game is Smash Up. Right now, there are 2,278 possible combinations based on factions alone. What that means is that is a lot of replayability out of the box. It's a different experience every time. But that number pales in comparison to Dominion, where I can't even count that high anymore. It's gotten to the point where I have at least 8 sets of Dominion. I can't even bring the box anywhere, so it just stays in my house, but when I play it, I'm going to get a unique experience every time because the cards really do make a difference. My number 3 is Elysium, which only has 56 combinations because for reasons I do not understand, they will not make an expansion to this game. It's probably for money, but this is such a fantastic game. And what I want to say about Elysium is that you definitely feel the presence of every individual god, and you feel their absence. If you've ever played, there are 8 gods and you choose 5 of them, which is where you get the combinations. But if a particular god is in, the game is going to have a very distinct feeling, and you're going to wish it was there if they're not in the game. But you can't have everyone, so you really feel the presence of each person, and it what keeps the game interesting, even though there are only 56 combinations. My number 4 is Seasons. Now this is a lot harder to calculate because Seasons is a bit different. It's a drafting game, and I have about 90 cards and you choose 9 of them. But there are also duplicates. So this number is based on not having any duplicates, and there's no guarantee that you're actually going to get individual ones because it is a draft. But as you can see, that number is still very high. And finally, not a typo, misses out just on number 5 is Kingdom Builder, and Kingdom Builder has multiple levels of configuration. There are the scoring mechanisms, and there are the special power mechanisms. When you consider the possible combinations for each of those, and you multiply them together, that's what gives you your unique states. So as you can see, I really like replayable games. They're my absolute favorite type, and they characterize what type of experiences I get out of the board gaming industry. But there's a problem. Do games need to be infinitely replayable anymore? So in the abstract, I talk about new games are coming out in record numbers. As the quality and frequency of games continues to increase at a significant rate, games are experiencing a shorter life cycle. We buy, sell, and trade quickly, or games get left on the shelf as newer titles emerge. What does it mean for a game to be replayable in 2019 if trends are emerging where people are playing more titles fewer times? Simply put, do you really need a game to be infinitely replayable when you have infinite options of playing something else? That's what we're going to be talking about. I'll be making a case for replayability. I'll be making a case against replayability. We'll look at some case studies of some specific examples, and then we'll see where that leaves us. And hopefully we'll have time for your thoughts and your questions. So, what are some of the definitions of replayability? For me, there's about 3 different aspects. There's the physical nature, the strategic nature, and the meaningful nature. As far as being physically replayable, I think of a puzzle. Once I've solved like a jigsaw puzzle, I can't really take it apart and solve it again because I've already solved it. Yes, I could probably do that. One of my absolute favorite games is a puzzle game. It's called Braid, and it's fantastic on Xbox 360. But the problem is, I already know all the solutions. I play it again for the story. If I go back and play it, I'm not going to be stopped on the puzzle because I already know how to solve it, so it's not that replayable. We also have seen a rise of legacy games, games that are specifically designed to not be replayable. And these are some of the most well-regarded games. I never would have thought, yes, I absolutely want to destroy something I spent a lot of money on. But with legacy games, that tends to change the industry a lot, and they've been very influential. So you have the physical nature of replayability. You also have the strategic nature. I talk a lot on my channels about how I do not like deterministic games. What that means is, you know exactly what the inputs and the outputs of every move, and you can theoretically math it out. How many of you have recently played tic-tac-toe with an adult? You wouldn't, because there's no reason to. We know what the best first move in tic-tac-toe is, and it's really hard to actually lose that game because most games should end in a tie. It's solved, there's no reason to play it. Sometimes we either have solved games for a deterministic game, or we develop dominant strategies. What a dominant strategy is, when you have no incentive to do what you did before. It worked the first time, it's going to have the same outcomes, why should it be any different? That's going to be a factor in replayability. There are some games that I really like, but the truth is, I do the same thing every time. It may not be dominant, but I know how to make it dominant, and therefore, it's not as replayable for me because I'm not getting a new experience every time. And that leads into whether it's meaningfully replayable. Do the games feel different? I don't know if anyone has ever played Star Realms on the app. It's one of my favorite ones. I play it when I tend to have 2 or 3 minutes. I'm not going to say how many times I've already played it today. I play this all the time, but the truth is that it doesn't feel different. I still love it, but it loses a little bit of its luster when the fact that it's like, okay, what colors are available? Red and green? Guess I'm playing red and green this game. And it's going to be playing out very similar to any other game where I played red and green. So we need to ask, do the games feel different? Now let's talk about more elements from what can you expect from a replayable game. Now, this is not a finite list, this is my interpretation. There are many other aspects as well, but these are a couple of ones that I've noticed. So for example, something I call configuration-based variability. When I started out in the hobby, we used to call this modularity because of Catan, which is listed as having a modular board. You can move the hexes around, you can move the numbers around, and it changes the value of each individual resource from game to game. So you get a little bit more replayability, or it might be a little bit more starved in one game, and it's going to be a lot more available in another. Well, the variability is very important. When you look at variable player powers, the ability to play the same game, but with a different character or a different ability, it gives you a different approach. And that's what lets you replay the game multiple times. So you'll very often see that. A good game should also have multiple strategies. If you've ever played Splendor, there are 2 main strategies. Buy the big cards, buy the low cards, and get the nobles. That's really it. And I love Splendor. Last year I talked about how Splendor was in the Hall of Fame already. We talked about games that we'll remember from 5 years ago. Splendor was on that list, and I still stand by that. But the truth is that there's only 2 strategies in every game. I'm going to play probably the one that has always worked for me. So it's not as replayable, I still enjoy it, but it's not going to feel different because it doesn't have those multiple strategies. The next one is particularly tricky, and I call it expandability and extensibility. An expansion doesn't necessarily make a game infinitely replayable. It doesn't necessarily make a game more replayable. An example would be Race for the Galaxy, which is actually my number 5 and not on the list. If you've ever played the Race for the Galaxy's expansion, you might be in the popular opinion that they got worse over time and that people tend to kick them out. So you might see games that have a lot of expansions, but just because they have a lot of expansions, if they throw them all together in the same box, you're not really controlling what's in the game or what's not. What you're doing is you're playing the same increasingly scoped game over and over again, and you're not restricting yourself based on any of the content. And that can also hurt the replayability because it means that the game becomes a little bit too random. An example for this is Mystic Vale. If you played Mystic Vale, the rules say to put in every expansion and just throw it in together. The problem is that you have no idea of what cards are actually going to come out, and it's hard to have a strategy because it's like, that card looks good, I'm going to buy it. One of the best things they did is add the conclaves, which restricts the scope of the game to these cards and these types of strategies are going to be in. So you can pick the ones that you want, and it makes it much more meaningful and, in my opinion, much more replayable. You talk about design space. Design space is the ability of a game to continue to evolve without really changing its core rule set. Is there a new way of interpreting something already in existence, or do I have to add on something? Worker placement games tend to have this problem where you've got a number of locations on the board. To expand the game, they usually have to add new locations. Not new actions that you can take at that location, but new locations altogether, which means that people generally just want to play with all of that, and that becomes the actual game. The base game becomes a trial, and the real game becomes everything thrown into the box. So deep design space is also going to be important for replayability. How can I continue to make nuances in what I already have, not really change the rules, change the strategy, and that should hopefully create more replayability. And more than anything else, it doesn't matter if a game is replayable if it is not fun. And fun is very hard to quantify, but I like to think that if I'm doing something interesting every single time and I'm not constantly having to relearn the rules, that for me is fun. It may not be the same for you, and that's perfectly okay, but some games simply aren't worth playing more than a handful of times, and we're going to see a couple of examples of that later. So, let's talk a little bit about gaming in 2018. Now, it's really hard to come up with stats because you see different numbers based on different people, but these have been verified by a couple of different sources. So, according to Polygon, $165 million was raised in Kickstarter, with 3,300 projects in board games alone. That is insane. Imagine if all the games that were produced last year were all the games that were in existence. That is more than enough for the rest of my lifetime. And in Gen Con, we had 60,000 attendees with over 600 games debuting. It was harder to get attendance at Essen because they don't really quote that number and I don't speak German, but there were at least 400 games that are played at Essen. That number was significant when I learned that because that is more games than I actually own. More games came out at one convention than I ever want to own in my lifetime. And as far as Origins, another convention that's getting really popular, it used to be small, attendance is up to 18,000 unique people. That's not the turnstile attendance, that's not day per day. That's saying at least 18,000 people bought a badge. Gaming is huge. There are plenty of growth opportunities. We have so many players, so many games. What does that mean for replayability? I often like to think about what does it mean for other industries, and I couldn't help but think of Netflix. I don't have infinite money. Do any of you have infinite money? If so, please tell me how. When I think of Netflix, I think about easy, convenient, infinite access. There are plenty of shows on Netflix that I would love to go back and rewatch from my childhood or from 10 years ago, but I also have plenty of other things that I've never seen before. How often do you think I actually go back and rewatch The Office or Parks and Rec or any of these other shows that I love? It almost never happens because why would I go back and re-experience something again when I can go experience something new? Half the time I put something in my queue, I never get to it because it's like, ooh, new show, new series of The Punisher, new series of Daredevil. It gets my immediate attention. I binge it and then I move on. I don't have to watch the same show over and over again because I'm given infinite options, more options than I know what to do with. If I'm being really honest, sometimes I sit on my couch trying to figure out what to watch for longer than I'm actually watching something. And I know that's not a unique problem, but I'm willing to admit it. So, if we progress towards that way of infinite options, you don't need infinite replayability necessarily because you will never be starved for content. But gaming isn't like Netflix, it's pretty unique. What makes it unique? There's a couple of defining characteristics. The first is that there is no defined endpoint for a game in most occasions. Unlike other entities, you beat the final boss, you read the last page, the credits roll, you watch the series finale, it's done. There's a clear indication that the content is over. But we don't have that for a game. You can go back and you can replay it. You should go back and replay it. In fact, it can actually get better over time. I would say that most of the time, the first experience you have with the game is not necessarily the best one, because you don't know what you're doing. This is typically common in worker placement games. I can't tell you how many times I teach a worker placement game and someone says, let's see what happens. That looks like a good spot. Let's go there. Of course, we don't know how things are going to play out, so we need to play them more times in order to get the maximum experience. In video games, I played Mass Effect 2 8 different times. And yes, it's a fantastic game, but the experience is never quite the same. But there are games that I played a lot more in board game form, many more times than 8, and it keeps getting better. So that's something pretty unique to our industry. There is also the human experience. It's really odd. When I'm playing a video game, I want to play by myself. When I'm playing a board game, I don't want to play by myself. I want to play with other people because other people give you a different experience based on how they react. There are some people, including some people in the audience, who are particularly antagonistic and love trying to screw me over. That creates a very... I'm not looking at anyone in particular. You guys are just raising your hands. So that creates a different experience in a game where if you have much more cooperative people who don't like to be mean, it definitely makes the game feel different. So who you're playing with matters a lot. When I talk about little deprecation, I talk about the fact that I've been a lifelong video gamer. But the truth is that I really don't have a reason to go back and play Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo because the games that have come out since then are much better. Yes, there's a nostalgia factor, and you can demo it here if you want to, but for the most part, older games tend not to hold up at time. That is not true of board games, where games that have come out and been out for a long while continue to have influence and industry. The very fact that we're still talking about Catan 24 years later is proof. People evolve past it, but for new people, it's still what's being sold in stores. It's still being their first gateway game. They love it. Games don't necessarily depreciate over time, and that's something that's very unique about board gaming. I have recently learned this term, shelfie, which is a picture of all your games. We really love to show off our collection. What does that tell us? Is that people really like owning large quantities of things, even if they don't do anything with it. I see Facebook posts all the day, selling these unplayed games in large quantities. It's kind of upsetting because I'm like, that game is amazing. Why are you selling that? What do you mean it's only $15? I have it. I kind of want to buy it just because they're getting rid of it and I want another copy. But we can't. We can't own everything, yet we love showing off the fact that we own so much. That's another interesting thing about the board game hunt. And that leads into the robust secondary market, which I just talked about, that you can get something from someone else in good quality at a good price, and you could sell it again. These games are sort of trading amongst each other. I wonder how many copies of the game actually exist, and how many are like fruitcake and just passing from person to person. They play it, they experience it, they like it, and they ultimately move on because they don't need a game to be replayable because there's always something else waiting in the wings. It's a very interesting question. I think there are 4 aspects of board gaming, and one of them should stand out more than the others. There is money, players, space, and time. There was a time when I was really hurting for money and couldn't really spend anything on it. When that happened, the games I had needed to be very replayable because I couldn't afford anything else. I also do not have infinite space. There's only so many closets I can find, so many hidden compartments in my house. I can't store everything, which means I can't own everything, which means I need my ability to replay my games because I don't have infinite money. You also need people to play games with. I may want to play something multiple times. That doesn't mean that people I'm playing with want to play it multiple times. There are plenty of times when we love a game and we simply can't get it to the table because we have no one to play it with. I currently have about 16 people in my gaming group. That's a really large number for most gaming groups. My extended network is closer to 30. If I'm just playing the same game over and over again, and I'm playing with different people because I have a large people, it may be replayable for me, but it's a new experience for them, and that can create issues as well. But all of these compared to the single most important aspect. I could always find more players. I could always find more money. I've managed to find more space, but I have not been able to invent more time. That is the one thing that is always going to be working against us. We simply never have enough time. When people talk about how much they play and wanting to play more, where is that time coming from? I got 470 plays in, was really trying for 500. And I want to make this clear. I don't ever want to play more than 500 games in a year. If I shouted that number, it means something went very wrong with my life. Where did I all of a sudden get all that time from? It shouldn't happen. There are people who play, I've heard, 1,200 games per year. How? How does that happen? I mean, I have a full-time job, I have 2 YouTube channels that I try to support, and I try and play games as much as possible, and I can only imagine playing 500. So where is that time coming from? I know someone who played a particular game over 3,000 times. I did the math based on when that game came out. It means that they're playing an average of 2 times per day. I would love to know how they're doing it and still having money. Please let me know afterwards, because I'd love to do that too. Of those 470 plays, I managed 257 unique games. I already talked about the size of my gaming group. 70 games were played once. That means that in most of those occasions, 70 times, I had to explain a game or be explained the game, and that's time that I could be spent gaming. When you are constantly playing new games, you're going to lose the overhead of having to explain the game, having to tone it down for new people. It's going to take longer. So playing a game once is kind of a benefit for replayability because you don't have to do it. 52 plays of mine were games that I didn't even own. What that should tell you is that I'm a pretty bad friend. It means that I'm primarily playing the games that I own and not really making time for anybody else. That's because I only have so much time and there are games that I want to play. I kind of have to be a little bit selfish and be the leader instead of being receptive to what other people want to play. And I did the math. If I never bought a game again, which is not going to happen, I currently have access to over 1,000 games. And though I often joke about dying tomorrow, I know that this will keep me satisfied for the rest of my life. If we all communally agreed to never buy a new game, there is more than enough content to satisfy us for the rest of our lives. In light of that, why do we need a game to be replayable when we have simply too many options and not enough time to go through everything? Do we spend the time that we have playing the games that we know and love, or do we take a chance on something else? That's what we're going to be talking about. So, what does it look like gaming today? You have more consumables. The great thing about board games is that you can play them over and over again. That is not true anymore. When you think about the Exit series, you literally destroy cards. You can't play it again. I've tried, can't be done. If something is bent, it means it was bent and it's a clue to someone, hey, you should bend that, because there's marking there. The Unlock series is more replayable because you can pass it around and it's app-driven, but Pandemic Legacy, I can't play it again because for spoiler-related reasons, we did something that makes the game unplayable. I'm not going to say what it is. And so Legacy games, there are some that have recharge packs, but for the most part, they're one-shots. And if they're very celebrated in the industry, as of last time I checked, Pandemic Legacy was still the #2 ranked game. Gloomhaven is #1, but for the longest time, Pandemic Legacy Season 1 was ranked #2. In other words, one of the most popular games of all time is a game that you could play once per ownership. We also have campaigns, which will be a new way of experiencing a game, and it changes the way that it will play out. Digital adaptations. This is something that people are very passionate about. I know a lot of people who don't like to play digital versions of the games for 2 reasons. One, it takes out the human factor when you're constantly playing the AI. The second thing is that what it does is it speeds up the clock on your game. I can never play Ascension again. I have played Ascension over 1,000 times. It's gotten old. If someone really wants to play it, I guess if they really want to play it, I'll play it with them, but I'm never going to suggest it. I loved it because that was the first app I had, and it was the only app I had for the longest time because it was free. But I am never going to play that game again because of Ascension. The more and more apps that we create, what that does is it speeds up the clock and makes it so that people are playing games in digital form and not necessarily in physical form because they've already gotten their fix of it. It's something that we have to watch out for. We've already talked about the secondary markets in Kickstarter, that they are growing faster than ever, that there simply are too many options to keep up with. You can't play every game that come out in a year. If you do, please tell me how you did it, because I'd love to know how. You're going to see a list of examples of games in 2018 I simply never got around to playing. But are the games that good? We're getting record numbers of games, but how are they actually faring compared to everything else? Now, Board Game Geek is a great resource, but it's also very subjective and hardly scientific. I don't understand how their ranking works, and I like to understand things. So take these numbers at face value. but you will see a couple of patterns. These are the games that were released in the last decade and how they've been ranked so far. What you'll notice is that 2019 has barely had an impact, but it's had one very successful game, and that's Wingspan, which is currently in the top 100. And that shows you that great games can cut through the crowd and make it to the top. Look at everything but 2018. You're seeing pretty constant numbers. 91, 89, 100, 89. Those 4 years, what's in the top 1,000 is fairly constant. The year didn't matter. But 2018 only had 49, roughly half of that. Now there's two possible explanations. Either we haven't had enough time for the numbers to stabilize, and therefore the numbers are a little bit premature, or the numbers are meaningful and the games simply aren't that good. We're getting a lot of games, but people aren't paying as much attention, because if you know a little bit about Board Game Geek, one of the things that they've said is that it's the number of votes that really matters, because they tend to seed it with some phantom votes. So the more votes that people actually have, the more likely it's going to progress to the top. But because we've increased the number of games, but we haven't increased the number of time, that means that we're dividing our votes, it's being split among several games, and they're all tending to be past the 2,000 mark. Also, if you look at the 2000s as well, it's fairly constant, 178, 170, a little bit of a drop in 141, but there's only 105 in the top 2,000. I don't have the answer. Was 2008 a great year in terms of quantity? Absolutely. Was it a great year in terms of quality? I can't say, and I don't know that we have the answer yet, but it's something to keep an eye on. Now, let's talk very specifically about the case for replayability. There's a couple of reasons why I think replayability still seems to matter today. And the first one is the fact that no one has infinite money. Yes, you can keep buying options, but those options aren't free. There isn't a Netflix for gaming. So if you can't keep spending money, you're forced to keep replaying what you already have, and therefore it's important that those games be replayable. There are also logistical benefits to this. I would love to meet the person who came up with the idea for the modern game night. I am just as guilty of this as anybody else. You go through the time of setting up and explaining a game, and everybody knows how to play it, and then you immediately go play something else where you go through and you set it up and you explain it, and then you play that. And then you do it over again. How many times have we actually played the same game back to back? I can count them this year, and it's mostly one particular game. But one example stood out. It's a game called Quadropolis, which we'll see later on in the presentation. I played Quadropolis with some people. They really liked it. We had extra time, so we played it again. People played different strategies. The scores were much tighter. There is really a benefit to using the fact that people already know how to do it. I have an insanely good memory that can memorize a ton of rules, even for games that I haven't even played in a while. People don't have that. If you play a game that you've played before, you may need a refresher. That's time that's wasted. You can play more games if people are playing what they already know how to play. So there are logistical benefits. You don't have to keep setting up and tearing down the same game over and over again. It's really great when you can replay the same game multiple times. You will also get a deeper appreciation for the games that you have. You'll get more strategies. You'll be able to do better. It's really hard to like a game when you're doing terrible. And the experience is, in most cases, people do worse the first time. It's on occasion, people get worse over time, but what that's probably more likely is that other players are getting better over time, and those players are not being able to compensate. So you'll get a deeper appreciation. And again, back to money, there is a return on the investment. You don't have infinite money. You want to get as much value as possible. If you're playing a game once or twice, that is not really a good effective rate. Consider this. Movie tickets, I belong to a movie club. For 1 hour, for $10, I can see a movie that gives me 2 hours of my life. I can spend $40 on a game that I'll play twice, and that will be 2 hours of my life. I can go see 4 movies, or I can go play 1 game. The math doesn't really add up. You want a deeper return on investment. So let's talk about one of these games. No surprise, my favorite game. Now, right now, we are currently airing the semifinals for 2019's March Madness event. Because of the replayability of this game, I designed an event, March Madness style, where I split the factions up into 32 teams and they just played each other over and over again with the winners advancing. It's really hard to do that with a game like Splendor or Ticket to Ride. When a game has so much replayability, you can do some amazing things with it. And I played Smash Up 100 times last year, which is not even that much compared to what other people, and I don't have a lot of time. What I'm saying is that of my 470 plays, approximately 20% of that was one game that I also talked about on a YouTube channel for over a year, and I'm still not sick of talking about it, and people are still not sick of hearing about it because the channel is doing very well. This is what happens when you focus on replayability. You get to use it over and over again, and it never feels stale. But here's a game that does feel stale. Fairy Tile. I was really excited about this when I first played this. I played this at Dice Tower Con. It's a very interesting game by Yellow, who's a fantastic publisher. The problem is, it's a very short game, and it's a very finite game. When we played it, this is one of the rare games that we actually played back to back. Yeah, I know you don't like this game. Look at someone in particular that I played it with. We played it back to back, and my appreciation for it dropped significantly because by the second time, I didn't see how the game was going to be different. After the first time I played it, I planned on buying this because it has so many people that I could play it with as a first time game. But can I play it with them a second time? I probably would have wasted money. This is something I had to pass on, even though I love the publisher, because the replayability simply isn't there. It's a closed game. I don't see how they can expand it. There's no real reason for me to own this. Someone in our group already owns it. It's not a game that I need to duplicate, and ultimately, I soured on it simply because the game isn't replayable. If I only have so much money to spend every year, it's not going to be on a game that I'm disappointed with after 2 times. And I'm saying that as someone who really liked the game. But what about another Yellow game? King of Tokyo. Now this is an example where I was famously wrong. I had a conversation with someone about the expansion. He said that King of Tokyo with the expansion is in his top 10 favorite games of all time, which was surprising because I know the games that he liked. And I like King of Tokyo. I put it on my 10x10 2 years ago, and I played it well more than 10 times over the course of my life. But I played it 10 times that year. And I started to kind of get sick of it after a while. But then I unexpectedly won a tournament and got all the content for free. So it's like, all right, I've got the expansion. I won it fair and square. You didn't win. So I got the expansion. Let's try it out. Well, as it turns out, King of Tokyo with this expansion is in my top 10 favorite games of all time because it completely rejuvenated. They could come out with a new character and a new power, and it's going to be an instant buy. When Anubis came out at Gen Con, I had to ask someone to buy it for me because I was so terrified of not having it, fear of missing out. With the King of New York characters, the monster packs, the packs that you get, this game became way more replayable just simply by adding in a new concept, the concept of evolution. There are other things you can add to the game that make it more replayable, and it completely revitalized the game that I thought I was done with. Same publisher, different approach. One was pretty closed off, the other one was left slightly open, and that's why King of Tokyo is something I'm still excited about playing today, and something that I'm going to suggest playing with other people, just because I like it so much. I'm a very serious gamer. You wouldn't expect King of Tokyo. When you look at the other games that I mentioned, they're all deeply strategic. Here, I'm rolling dice and trying to claw people to death. But it's that much fun, and it comes a lot from the replayability of the characters. It went from, it didn't matter, okay, I'll be the dragon, or I'll be the gorilla, or I'll be whatever people feel like having. All of a sudden, the characters mattered, and it breathed new life into the game. These are all examples to me of what happens when you do and do not focus on replayability. But I could also give you several reasons why replayability is not as significant anymore. And the first of them is the fact that it comes with a learning curve. My boss recently asked me what the learning curve for Smash Up was, and I told him the truth. I'm still learning. It's insane. When you have a game that has a complex system, it's going to take time to master. That is not easy for people to accept. It's really hard for me to play someone in Dominion and say, would you like to play Dominion? You're going to lose very badly because I know all the cards and you don't. It's really hard to onboard someone, and you can't necessarily handicap. It's easier to do that in Smash Up, and I've talked a lot about that with people. They ask me pretty much every week, how do I teach new players? But for some of those other games, here's a funny stat about Kingdom Builder. I have played Kingdom Builder over 1,000 times on my phone with an 80% win rate. I have played it in person once. My number 6 favorite game I played once because I haven't figured out how to actually get someone to buy into the concept because they're going to lose the first game. they'll get better over time, but there's no reason for them to all of a sudden take on a game that they're going to have to play multiple times, particularly when I myself have only played it once in person. Learning curve matters significantly. You also start pigeonholing based on players. One of the running jokes with Seasons is that I will not teach this game to new players. I don't want the downtime. I don't want to have to sort the cards. The numbers are very tiny. You have to give people specific cards, and it's just too much. I'd rather play with people who already know how to play it. What that means, again, is that I'm not being a good host. I'm not being a good friend. I'm prioritizing myself and the game over the people that I'm playing with. If a game is replayable, but I'm subject to the people I can play it with, then the game is not that replayable because it's going to limit the amount of times I can actually bring it out. The next one is storage issues, and I mentioned this with Dominion. I have 8 boxes. I can't just pack that all and have a bunch of boxes and put them down the table and be like, all right, who wants to play Dominion? It's intimidating. I can't bring everything with me. Because I have so much content, I actually rarely play it. Dominion can be played for the rest of my life, but I almost never play it because I can't bring it anywhere and I can't play it with anybody. Storage issues matter. The games that can fit in one box tend to do a lot better. You will also have an issue with return on investment, and there's a very specific use case about this that you'll see in a bit. The more you spend on a game, the more you'll spend on a game. I'll keep buying expansions for the same games, but if I'm not playing it, like the DC deck building game, I'm just wasting money. Rather than, if you only have so much money, you might want to spend it on things that you'll actually play. If replayability turns out to be a barrier and an entry point, then why spend the money on it? Why not spend it on something where there's a more even playing field where you can actually play with other people? You'll also limit your exposure significantly. I'm going to show you in a little bit the games of 2018 I did not play because I was busy playing other things. It's really hard. It's a matter of pride sometimes. Like, what? You've never played that game? I can't play everything. So if you focus on playing the same game over and over again, you may be missing out on games that you actually will really enjoy. The industry is moving against this. You don't need replayable games if people are willing to destroy it. It's kind of an interesting case with Pandemic Legacy Season 1. I was so worried about destroying it for the higher price tag, but people are willing to do it, and people are like, I don't want to play a game I can play only once. But as you'll see with Pandemic Legacy, I played it 15 times, which actually puts it in my 3rd most played game of 2018. A game I can only play once, I still got to experience more than anything else. Maybe it doesn't need to be replayable, which is why I feel that replayability may ultimately be unnecessary. And let's look at some examples as to why that might be. Here are the top 10 scoring games on BGG's rank. I've only played one of these games, and unsurprisingly, it's one of the lightest and the shortest ones, and it's Decrypto. I played it twice. I know many other people who have played these games, but I never got around to it. Some very celebrated games I simply do not have time for because I'm too busy elsewhere, and I'm missing out on a lot of industry darlings as a result. I mentioned Pandemic Legacy. This is one of our case studies. I've been thinking about buying a second copy, a blue box instead of a red box, and playing it again to see what we could do differently and improve our score. Our experience might not be the same, but it will still be pretty good. But even if I never play it, this remains one of the greatest gaming memories of my entire life, and it's going to be hard to trump. Something that I've only played and experienced once is one of the greatest ones, and I've only played it 15 times. We only lost 3 games. We did really well. Still number 2 has a higher MSRP, and I'm saying I'm willing to spend that money and destroy it because it's that good of a game, even though it's not replayable. The next one is Quadropolis. This is on my 10x10 right now. This is a great Days of Wonder game, but there's a problem. There are 6 different ways of scoring in the base set, and I tell people to choose 3 of them. Don't over-diversify, try and pick 3 of them. From my perspective, that creates 20 unique strategies that you can do. But it's a drafting game, and nothing stops me from doing the same thing over and over again. When I talk about dominant strategies, with this game, I found myself having to condition myself to intentionally not pick the same tiles from game to game. It's really hard to do, and that puts a strain on the game. Maybe I can just play it a couple of times, find out how to win, and then move on. I'm very curious to see what the advanced side does and how it feels after 10 plays. I'm only on 3 right now, but I'm not convinced that this is going to be something that I'm going to be able to play a high number of times, even though I really like it and I like all of Days of Wonder. The final one is Sentinels of the Multiverse. Now this is a game that one of my viewers got me hooked on because it is another gaming system, one that has tons of content. I was trying to do the math to figure out, if I bought this, how much would it cost me to own everything? I couldn't figure it out because not everything is in stock. But the game is available digitally, where I've been playing it. And that's the only way. I've not played this in physical form. I played it on Tabletop Simulator, and I played the app a bunch in a short amount of time. To buy all the digital assets for this game would cost at least $50. Most apps tend to be about $5 to $7 if they're considered expensive. If an app is expensive, really expensive, it'll be $10. All the content for this game costs $50 plus the initial $7. That's more than a board game itself. So if the digital content, which is supposed to be cheaper, costs that much, how much do you think the actual game will cost? And there's a very reasonable question I would ask. Who am I going to play this with? If I owned it, I would want to own all of it, but I have no idea how I would bring this game to the table. There is so much variability here. Who's the villain that you're playing? What's the environment like? How many heroes do you have? What is the order of the heroes? Are you using one of their variant-based powers? I can play this game endlessly. I only have the base game, and I played it probably about 30 times already in a short amount of time because it's that replayable. But I'm fairly confident if I bought this game and all of its content, I might not make it to the table more than 5 times per year, and it would be a terrible return on investment. I've had so many staring contests with add to cart, remove to cart, thinking about buying this game, but I can't pull the trigger simply because I can't take on another gaming system. There is one wild card in all of this, and it's reprints. We talk a lot about the games that are being created and that we're getting more and more games. We're seeing less interim print cycles. I can't pronounce his name, but Ignacy Trzewiczek, I think it's pronounced, talked about how most of his games are printed once and then they're done because the industry can't justify spending more money because people aren't going to be interested in the game later on. It will be replaced by something else. And that's true. But there have been a couple of notable reprints in the past year. Arboretum is a game that's really tiny and not very pricey, but it's a game that a lot of people wanted for a long time and was finally reprinted. I waited for years for Medici to be reprinted, and I finally snagged a copy. Through the Desert and other Knizia games have recently been reprinted. And even Camel Up got a reprint and a second edition. Camel Up came out in, I think, 2014 when it won the Game of the Year, somehow beating Splendor, which doesn't make any sense. But people are still interested in it to get a second edition. And I have to say, though I haven't played the second edition, it looks really nice, and it gained new relevance. So while the industry is saying we want new and newer games, and there's other examples of this, there are occasional reprints that are noticeable, games that have been out of print that cause up a lot of storm. And I think that's why we don't know how this is going to play out, because we don't know what factor the reprints will make. The last thing I want to bring up when I talk about replayability is what is the number that you're targeting? Is it 10 times, 100 times, 50 times? How many times do you have to play a game in order to be satisfied? It's different for every person. I really like the 10 by 10 challenge because 10 seems to be a magic number. Jamaica, King of Tokyo, without their expansions, once I got to 10 times, I kind of was done with the game and didn't really feel like playing it. I think I played Jamaica once in the following year simply because I was doing the same thing over and over again. It's not clear what we should be targeting for replayability. If you think about it, it's also not in the designer's best interest. If all you're doing is playing their same game over and over again and never spending money on any more of their other titles, they don't really want that. You kind of want to move on from game to game, and there's no clear indication as to what the satisfaction level is. I heard about a book that managers give to their other managers, love them or leave them. Either you love your employees or you lose them because there's always someone else. Is that a policy that we need to adopt with our games? I've given away one game that I've owned. I have not sold anything. There are plenty of games I haven't gotten rid of because there are memories attached to those games, and I feel like I'm losing the memories when I get rid of the game. So they just stay in the closet, and no one is going to use them ever. Maybe I'll play them once every 5 years. But are they better served in someone else's hands? Can they be a new experience for someone else instead of a dead experience for me? Should I cut the cord? Should I start the cull? I'm afraid once I do that, I'm never going to stop. That's what I've seen on Facebook. But it shows you that you don't necessarily need to keep holding on to the same games, because there's always someone else who will play your game, and there's always someone else's game that you'll be happy to play. So where does this leave us? Is there a middle ground? With the games that I play, you can clearly see that I am pro replayability, and yet I have a hard time trying to convince people to play the same game over and over again. There are cases for it. There are cases against it. Is there a place in the middle? Honestly, I'm not sure. If you play the same game over and over again, you will miss out. If you play a new game every time, you'll be learning a bunch of rules and you'll never get that deeper experience. If you try to be both, I actually think that's kind of worse. I think you're getting the worst of both worlds instead of the best of both worlds. I feel like you're going to be unsatisfied because you'll have the itch. I really like that game, but I also want to do these other things. I get the maximum amount of appreciation by being fully invested. And that's why I'm starting to think either you're fully in or you're fully out. And that's not to say that one is right and the other is wrong. It comes down to personal preference. What I am saying is I don't know that there is a middle ground, and I think you have to make a choice for yourself. But what do you think? I'm pro replayability, and I'm telling you that it may not matter anymore. I'm very interested to see what are other people playing, what do they think, have they experienced many of the same things that I'm talking about? If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them now.
So, I play a lot of video games. They're not very replayable, like Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. You play it once, you know where all the chests are. But what about randomizing the game? I've heard of randomizers on Twitch. They randomize where the chests are, randomize what items you get in what order. Is that the same thing as replaying the game?
That's a great question. So the question is, if you can randomize a video game, which is done through mods, are you creating a new experience? I would think yes, for the most part you are. Now, I haven't done that myself, and there's a reason why I'm not playing video games much anymore, mostly because of time, but also I can't incur the costs. I have seen someone actually watch a play of the Link to the Past, that's on your shirt, right? Where they randomized everything, and it's no longer, all right, the Pegasus boots are in here, you have to find a new way to play the game. And I would say yes, that does make a game more replayable. However, what I would say is, does that change how you defeat the boss? There's still the boss that you ram into with the Pegasus boots, you just don't know where the boots are. So there's reasons why it is more replayable, but I'm pretty sure if it's a Link game, whatever it is I have to do, I will just do it 3 times, and then I will defeat the boss. Like, oh, it's a Dodongo. I wasn't expecting him to be in that level, but let's try putting a bomb in his mouth. Yep, that's the trick. So I'd say it's about 50-50, but it's still a great question.
So first off, I'd just like to make a statement that you were using Netflix as a comparison point earlier. I tend to think of the industry now as more of a comparison to, say, the App Store on your phone. There's lots and lots of choices, but if most of them are just apps that make fart sounds, then what's the point? I do have a question, though, and that is, do you think that the fact that replayability is probably becoming less and less of an important thing for publishers, if you feel like that could ultimately affect the quality of components, the quality of the game itself, if the concentration is mostly on getting through a game just to get to the next game, then that really disincentivizes publishers to produce good games. And finally, you said earlier that you were surprised that Campbell Up won the award over Splendor. I think that's mostly because Camel Up is fun and Splendor isn't. Ooh, come at me, bro. Yeah.
Let's talk offline about that third part. So the question was, would replayability eventually change the quality of components? If components will get damaged over time, so if you're not playing a game over time, will that actually mean that people can cut corners and not focus as much? It's an interesting question. My gut reaction is, I don't think so. Games have a tendency to be overproduced just as much as they have a tendency to be underproduced. For every game that comes out that has terrible card quality or looks like they were trying to save, a couple of bucks, there are games that have unnecessary miniatures or overproduced components, and that's driving the price up. I think that people want their games to look good, and I think that when a game looks bad, people tend to notice, and I don't understand this at all, but there are plenty of people who do this. A game doesn't look as good, and therefore the game is somehow worse because it's not pretty. And I think that publishers are cognizant of it. Yes, I do think that it could, like, if a game is going to be destroyed, it doesn't necessarily need to be pretty at all. Or Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, I could see them, if you're only going to be playing the cases once, they're not going to print it necessarily on high quality paper. There are cases where it's yes, but my gut would say no more often than not. And again, Camelot versus Splendor, let's talk offline about that.
Hi.
Hi.
So with your games that are being reprinted, you have companies like Restoration Games reprinting like Fireball Island, Downforce, and the upcoming Dark Tower. So is there any other game that from the past that you like absolutely despise that might be reprinted that you think would have positive replayability in the marketplace?
Are you trying to get me to say Mall Madness?
I just got you to say Mall Madness.
It would not surprise me if that game is reprinted. I actually think it would do pretty well. So first, that's a great question. The question is, with Restoration Games, whose job is specifically to bring back older games that are out of print, is there another likely target? My gut reaction would be a game from my childhood called Hero Quest. Now, I love this game. I have no idea if it would be terrible. That's right, you just got it actually. My gut reaction is it might be terrible, but I don't care. It's the type of game that people are still playing and still looking to get a copy of, and it would do very well as Restoration. I think nostalgia plays a large role in whether or not people will come back. I don't think Fireball Island did well. Fireball Island did well because it was old. I think people were like, oh yeah, Fireball Island, I love that. And if you can capture that nostalgia with some select titles like Hero Quest, I think they will definitely cut through, and that's why Fireball Island did so well on Kickstarter. What was that? More Madness plus Dead Rising equals a lot of zombies. Sure, why not? Mashups are in right now. Any other questions? Do you have a question?
So if you said that replayability was necessary, do you think that expansion packs are a sustainable way to maintain replayability?
So the question, if I'm hearing correctly, are expansions necessary for replayability? For sustainability? Yes and no. There is a point where it gets to be too much. So as much as I love Smash Up, I understand when everyone talks about like, oh, there's another expansion. Don't they have enough? When you look at Seasons, Seasons had 2 expansions and they're done. But you still get a lot of people who are playing it, and it's still a very popular game that's highly regarded. What they did is they predicted their life cycle and they found a way to make it work. Yes, expansions will breathe new life into a game, but expansions aren't necessarily guaranteed to be successful. If an expansion is bad, it could actually kill the game, and I think that's what happened with Race for the Galaxy. Race for the Galaxy, the first expansion is a must-buy. It's fantastic. I love the goals. I love the extra new starting worlds. The second expansion is not fantastic, but I'll play it on occasion. The third expansion I've never played, and I've heard it's unplayable and should not be consumed in any way. At a certain point, they had to pivot to Roll for the Galaxy. And Roll for the Galaxy had its own expansion. And while they were doing it, Roll for the Galaxy had its own expansion, I think it's called Ambition, and Race for the Galaxy started to have another trilogy of expansions that aren't compatible with the original game and the original expansions. It's not getting as much attention. So the expansions aren't making a difference. Is it a quality expansion, and does it make sense in the game? Now both of those are possibly threatened by Race for the Galaxy, the board game edition. I'm not sure what it's called, but so you can see that expansions can make a difference, but they could also not make a difference. Yes, it's vital, but it needs to be done correctly.
So
continuing on the idea of expansions, what are your thoughts on Catan?
On Catan? I missed the boat. Now, some background information. I actually did my master's thesis on Settlers of Catan and have watched millions of games been simulated very quickly. I can't play that game anymore because everyone wants to beat me on Catan. I really enjoyed Cities and Knights. It was great. I might consider owning it, but it's still Catan at its core, and while it was new, it wasn't that new, given that I'm kind of burned out from having watched it, and the fact that no one will trade with me anymore. You can't play a trading game if it's like, all right, I'm subject to the die rolls. I've heard people combine all of Catan together. I don't think that's how the game is meant to be played, because it's too much. I think Catan is another example of a gaming system. On Crank It Up, we've talked about actually doing a Catan series as to how to create Catan and what expansions you could combine. I think there is interest in that, and I think it would serve the industry well. There definitely is a piecemeal-like customization component for it. I just don't know if it's for me anymore, because I've kind of ruined the game for myself. Sure, another question.
In your opinion, what are some games that have implemented tutorials in a way that lended themselves well to replayability? Like with Fable 2, I often don't want to play it because the tutorial is so long. What do you think are some games that do that better?
That is a fantastic question. So the question is about tutorials and what games have done it well. I did a podcast episode on what I called the B-side problem. If you look at the number of times I played Seven Wonder on the A side versus the B side, I almost never get to the B side because I'm almost always teaching the game. A tutorial in a game might be an easier mode of playing. It means don't play with these rules. One of the best examples, I think, would actually be Carcassonne. Now, I own Carcassonne, the Rio Grande edition, before it was sold to Z-Man. So I play with farmers. But if you look at the Z-Man rulebook, I'm told that farmers are now actually considered to be a variant because it's really hard to explain farmers to some people and to tell where the lines of distinction are. So they took out the most complicated aspect of the game, and you can learn the other three types of tiles. Then you could add on farmers. So I think Carcassonne is a good example, and Carcassonne has a ton of content. Again, a little bit late. I can't own any of it because now it's not compatible with my old Rio Grande edition, and I've played Carcassonne so many times, I can't justify going and getting the Z-Man edition. Other games that I think have done it really well is Elysium. Elysium has a standard 5 set that is still very interesting. I've actually played the standard 5 with people who have already played because I like them so much. And it says, this is our suggestion. It gives you a great overview of the game. It's not hard to set up, and then the gameplay is exactly the same, and it's not hard to just swap out even one of those people and get a few experience. So those would be the two examples off the top of my head. We have one more minute, probably time for one last question. If not, I want to thank everyone for coming. I'll be doing a game series specifically on replayable games for the rest of the convention. I'm over at the Board Game Bandit booth in the free-to-play area. You're more than welcome to have a conversation or come try a game. These games can be expensive. I would love for you to try it for free and see whether or not you really like it. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great time at the rest of the convention.